So joining us on this episode of the Zen Business Podcast is my great friend and leadership coach and serial entrepreneur, Gio. Gio, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for your grace and hospitality.
Oh, mate, it's lovely to have you here.
A chai latte on almond milk.
No,
and
we got it all. There was even chocolate.
There was even chocolate. I can rate it. So today we're going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about the difference between influence and control. We're going to talk about fear-based leadership. We're also going to probably touch on the masculine and feminine when it comes to leadership and how that plays out.
Yep.
How there's a duality to both sides of the masculine and the feminine, and which we were just talking about before we started filming. But I thought I'd kick it over to you just to share a little bit of your story to begin with, and how you got to be, where you are today, which is empowering and making a profound difference in the lives of men and women, especially in the small business entrepreneur space, when it comes to, really creating a life that they love. Very much aligned with the purpose of this show, which is, creating a life that you love while building your company.
Yeah.
So I thought we'd just kick off and have you share a bit of your story, because it is inspiring, and the work that you've done around it, is very moving. So I'd love you to share.
Yeah. Look, I think everything that I have come to have in my life and work with in my life, I think has come out of experience, obviously, So we have one life to live, and no matter how many twisty turns in our road that we have, and I'll start to share some of those in a minute, each one of those are purposeful. Whether you know it at the time or not is another thing, but certainly when I look back and I can see the tapestry of my life, it was all perfectly interwoven to lead me to exactly where I'm at. In saying that, I've caused myself great difficulties over the years, as you know, in the mix of when it's happening. And a lot of that sits in and around self-judgment and self-worth and whatnot. But I think for me, the distinctions that I make and the people that I work with is around making a difference, particularly for business owners, but also in relationships, people that are, struggling relationships or have left a relationship. I work with them because, businesses are so integral to the whole of their lives. So it consumes a lot of energy, a lot of time for small and medium businesses. The person that's running that, quite often it's a husband-wife team, they're consumed in those businesses. And so the impacts that has, the reasons why we do what we do in our businesses has become apparent, well, certainly in my own context, but it's easy to then relate that to other people. Mm-hmm. And then the effects that has on relationships, having my own, dilemmas in that over the past years and running my own business, has allowed me to sort of dissect it. I think really the biggest thing from my life purpose is that, and again, I had to go into all of these things and kind of explode everything so that I could work out how to put it all back together. And I've become a bit of a mechanic in that. So that when I see somebody, or I have somebody that I'm working with, whether it be the leader of an organisation or somebody in a personal relationship, I can actually see the mechanics of what's going on there and then help them to start to see what's going on, not only from their perspective, but from the other person's perspective that might be involved from there. So if it's a staff member or a spouse. So to do that, what I thought would be great would be to maybe just tell my story. And along the way, we'll see what distinctions come up and then go from there. So.
Yeah, perfect. And it's something that we haven't done on the show before, which I'm excited for you to share. And because I know you've done a lot of work healing past wounds. And if there was one thing, really it's healing the wounds of your inner 5-year-old. And you've done the work and you continue to do that work.
It's non-stop.
Yeah, absolutely. The next layer of the onion, really. So, I'd love you to share your story.
Yeah, so I suppose the earliest recollection is when I'm around 7, just about to turn 8, my life dramatically changed. We were overseas at the time, and I woke up one morning. It was quite early, still quite dark. We were in Germany at my uncle's place, and my mum and dad were having a pretty bad sort of blue, and there were threats of being, going back to Australia, and we were only over there for holidays, but, Mum was crying, there was a whole lot of stuff going on, and there's a whole story in and around that, and I don't want to get into that, but the context of my relationship with my father changed right there and then. It wasn't conscious of it. I can see it now looking back. And what started to occur after that day was I started to get physically abused, and pretty badly. He's a powerful man. He's only short, but he was blacksmith by trade, had forearms on him like Popeye. And so he started to physically, and mentally abuse me. And so what happened at 8, and through the work that you mentioned, that I've uncovered, is I made 3 distinctions about myself. And again, these weren't conscious distinctions, but they were distinctions nonetheless. And they were that I was not lovable, I wasn't valuable, and that I was a coward. And the cowardice is really around the fact that at 8 years of age, I couldn't defend myself. So I'd just cover up. So this goes on for many years, and at about the age of 11, I remember being in my change room for swimming at primary school, and I took my shirt off, and I heard a collective gasp in the room. And that was at the start of my back, because I was black and blue, belt marks, hand marks, you name it, all over me. There was this collective gasp. And so I made a new distinction at this point in time, and that was that what was happening to me was wrong. See, because up until then, it was just what was happening. I really wasn't conscious to having any sort of judgment about this. It was just that, until this moment. And so again, the relationship's deteriorating. The mental manipulation was really a big part of it from that age onwards as well. There was trauma in and around my mother and father's relationship all the way along, so the stability of our home was quite difficult. We get to points, and what I recognise about myself and my, I'm trying to think of the right word for my nature, prickly nature would be a good word for it, is that I would then I find myself actually instigating some of the beatings. I'm looking for attention at this point in time from my father, because one of the things that he used to do was just shut down and not talk to me. And that could go on for weeks, even months.
Right.
So I remember vividly coming home with a poor report card at Christmas time, which was often, not because I was a poor student, but I just misbehaved. My marks were always pretty good, but the comments from the teachers weren't always, all that good.
Boisterous.
Yeah, boisterous was one of the things. Destructive in class, I think, was one.
Destructive or disruptive?
Both. Both, Simon, yeah. So, things that we can sit down and be a little bit cheeky about now, but certainly at the time, I recognised behaviour patterns at that time. And so he would, Christmas time, I just wouldn't get spoken to, not even on Christmas Day. He'd grunt at me for Christmas Day. And so I would then go and instigate and do things to instigate at least a flogging, so I could get something from
some sort of attention, yeah.
Anyway, get to about 15 years of age, and he's flogging me, and he's over the top of me, and he's pummeling me. He's got close fists, and he's Dad's from Sardinia, and something to do with donkeys over there, right? And so he's screaming at me, not even a donkey so stupid to do the same thing wrong 3 times. Anyway, he finishes the flogging. I stand up and I look him in the eye and I said, "Well, how good are you going?" And he went, "What?" And I said, "Mate, you've been flogging me for the same shit for years. You don't realise you're not going to change me. You're going to have to kill me first." And at that moment, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. And up until this point, remember, I'm working on the premise that I'm not lovable, not valuable, and I'm a coward. So this moment was a defining moment in the next stages of my life, because with that fear in this fearsome man in his eyes, I went, "Oh shit, that's power." That's what power feels like.
Yeah, and you shifted the balance of it.
Yeah, and I did. It was significant.
Yeah.
And in fact, that was the last time he physically beat me.
There you go.
And the mental stuff continued to go on for years, but the physical side of it shifted right there. And so, of course, being a young man and having great role models in this area, I started to drink and fight. And I was a footy player, so any opportunity on the football field. I never started any. I had plenty of good mates that started them.
You finished them,
but we finished plenty. And one in all in was there's a team ethic, and all that
pretty
sort of
standard
stuff. And I'm involved with young football players at the moment. My son's 18, and it's just interesting to see it all over again, Simon. It really is.
Without the biff these days.
Well, still a little bit of it.
A little bit of it.
They don't throw too many punches these days, but there's a lot of testosterone going on.
Yeah, of course.
Anyway, so I start drinking and fighting, and we're finding great opportunities to do so on the footy field or, amongst ourselves sometimes. And, this pattern starts to come in, and the drinking really isn't around numbing the pain, and the fighting isn't around feelings and power, right? And if I look at that group of friends at that point in time, all of us had difficulties in our lives, split marriages. There was all sorts of stuff that were affecting those kids. Anyway, we get to about 18 years of age, and I have a first love, and all the rest of it. We connect for about a year or two, and of course we break up because it's the first love. She was a wonderful young girl, but we got engaged because that was a good thing to do at 18. And of course, when she left, that sent me in a bit of a tailspin. So there was more drinking and even more fighting from that position on. And at about 23, I'd recognised in myself that I was on the same path as my father was. And one of the great things that's occurred in my life is because I've judged his path to be a certain thing, and that for most of my life it's been wrong, of course. It's been a wonderful barometer for me to bounce back off, to go back into what I call my right path. And I want to really be conscious to that has shifted for me. So I don't see his path as being wrong anymore.
Yeah, we're going to come back and dig a little bit deeper around that, because I know you've made peace with all of that, and there'll be those that are watching or listening that will be mortified, horrified by that story. So I would like to dig a little bit deeper around your forgiveness process and the healing process that you.
Well, it's still ongoing, but
of course.
So just the distinction that at that point in my life...
But at 23, there was no forgiveness.
No shit. No. I mean, at that point, I'd moved out at 18. I was living on my footy coach's floor for 6 or 7 months while I was doing a pre-vocational course, working for him one day a week so that I could pay for rent. And thank God he was there in my life, because, one of us would have killed each other, if I'd have stayed there. And I'd say it would have been me dead, to be fair.
Yeah.
We were at each other at that point, So, at 23, there certainly wasn't any forgiveness there, but because I could see myself going down that path, and where it really hit out was a couple of my really good friends. One of them was in a pretty self-destructive mode as well, and he'd start the fight. He was a classic for starting the fights. You go into a pub, and within 10 minutes, you get your first round, and we'd be into it.
Yeah, right.
And I remember we were at Harvey Bay the year before, and we were there for New Year's Eve, and it was 8 o'clock in the evening, and there's an all-in brawl with about 17 people in it. It was like the OK Corral sort of thing, a saloon bar thing. And there's people getting beat up left, right and centre. And I just said to him at the time, I said, what the bloody hell are we doing? So him and I end up knuckling. And so the next year, I'm sitting there going, well, I'm not doing that again, And so I didn't go on the annual trip up to Harvey Bay so that we could terrorise that place once more. I stayed at home and I got myself off the grog. And in that time, I got some time to clearly think. So interesting what part alcohol was playing in clouding my judgments and my thought processes and all the rest of it. And at this point, I'm a bricklayer by trade as well, by the way. So I'm surrounded by a lot of people on alcohol, a lot of alcoholics, a lot of criminals that I was working with, seasoned criminals. I got clear, and I just went, this is not what I want for my life. And so that year was a significant year in my life. I cleaned myself up. I enrolled myself in the Diploma of Construction Management, which was 5 years, 3 nights a week, which had to take discipline, which I'd had all the way through my life. I'd been involved in Air Cadets, and I was a sergeant in Air Cadets, and I was a leader there. I was a leader in my scout stuff. I was a captain of volleyball. So I'd had these leadership roles all the way through my life. So there's duality to me. There's this leadership and strength in one area, destructive on the other side.
Yeah.
It's something, the two of me, I call it. Gio, and I don't know what the other bloke's name is, but and so I adopt my and I remember the first night of this diploma, Alan Allsop, the guy who enrolled, because I go into it and I haven't finished my apprenticeship, and at the time the prerequisite is that I had to be a tradesman. And I wasn't a tradesman until I think it was March or April of that year. So he said, oh, look, mate, come back in June and we'll put you into the next intake. And I said, no, mate, I'm here now. You either put me in now, or I don't know if I'll be back in June, And he put me in, he broke the rules for it and put me in. And interesting, you fast forward 5 years, I finished that course. But on that first night, Alan Allsop addresses 45 of us in the room. And he says the stats of this program for the last 35 years is that out of the 45 of you that are sitting in this room, half of you will be gone by the end of this year, 5 of you will complete.
Wow.
And he's bang on. That's exactly what happened. And we started at Mancravat TAFE back in the day. We did 2 years there, and then I went to Ithaca TAFE at Red Hill there and did the last 3 years there. And the lovely little tie is on the last day of my diploma, I'd handed in my assignment, hadn't seen Alan in 3 years, and I'm walking up the hallway after handing my assignment, and there's Alan also walking down the hallway.
Of course there is, yeah.
And I said, Alan, you wouldn't believe it, I finished the course. And he said, I knew you were going to finish the course the day you walked into my office. I said, shit, I wish you'd have told me that. Because there's many a time I thought about dropping out, and I told him that. You know?
Yeah.
He said, yeah, but you didn't. And I knew that in you when I put you in. So that, again, I didn't see that in me. And
that drive and determination.
Yeah, I've judged myself very harshly along my life because of the circumstances, I believe, is probably what led me to make those decisions about not lovable, not
That's
valuable.
right, yeah. When that's driving the show, you don't get to see the strengths.
No, yeah. And yet he saw it in abundance. He just knew that this guy's going to finish it, right? He was going to be one of the 5.
And isn't that just a great leadership principle in itself? And that is listening to someone greater than they listen to themselves.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, we've all had the benefit of having people that have put time into us as people.
Even if we don't recognise it.
And even if we haven't even appreciated it.
Or appreciated, yeah.
And they've seen something in us. And I certainly, when I coach people, sometimes there's a frustration as a coach. You know what you're seeing in front of you and the potential that's sitting there.
I often say that. I say, look, I've got a request, and my request is that you listen to my relationship to you over your relationship to you, because I can see the potential in that.
Yeah.
You know, stop listening to that self-doubt and listen to me. Believe me. Don't believe that the fearful ego mind.
That's interesting, because that decision at around 23, there was a guy called Peter Pegangelli that grabbed me. It was a couple of years earlier, and we were sitting in the smoko room, and he was my project manager for the company I was doing my apprenticeship with. And Peter said, Gio, do you need a lift home this afternoon? He'd never given me a lift in the past or anything. He never gave me a lift after this either, by the way. And I said, yeah, actually, mate, I do. You know. So he said, well, I'll give you a lift home. So we're in the car, and he says, Gio, what do you want to do with your life? And at this stage, I'm about 19 or 20, and I thought, you know, girls and alcohol sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
I was really good at alcohol, no good at girls. He said, well, mate, here's the go. You know, because I said that out loud, of course, because I'm a funny bugger. He said, well, here's the go, mate. When you go onto the smoko shift tomorrow, have a look at the guys that are 10 years in front of you and see if that's, because that's the path you're on, if that's where you want to be. And then have a look at the guys that are 30 years in front of you and have a look and if that's where you want to be. And I looked in that next room. That next day I was sitting in that room and I looked around, and the guys that were 10 years, there were a number of hardened criminals in there. There were guys that had done rape and grievous bodily harm, and they'd been in jail a number of times. There was the guy who used to give me a regular lift, I'll never forget the first day he gave me a lift. He's rummaging around at the bottom of the XC Falcon, you know. It comes up and he pulls out a square beer, a Bundy rum, right? Cracks it, and we're going from Holland Park to Kangaroo Point. It's not a long drive.
Yeah. So what's that? 5Ks, 10Ks?
Probably that. Maybe back in those days, maybe 15, 20 minutes at most.
Right.
By the time we got to work, mate, half that bottle was gone.
Straight. Yeah, right.
Just, you want some? No, mate, I'm all good. I'm good, thanks. Same guy used to hang, a 6-pack of beers in the water drum that the labourer would use to keep them cool so he could drink them at smoko, right? A full-on alcoholic, you know.
Yeah.
So I remember, and then the guys 30 years would get out of the seat, and it'd take them 15 steps before they could warm up and straighten their back and their knees and all the rest of it, you know. So, and I remember something that I'd forgotten, but I was reminded of this in 2005. Another significant point in my life. But I stood up in that room that day and I went, I won't be laying bricks in 10 years' time. Said it. Proclaimed it.
Proclaimed it. Wow.
There's 60 guys in the smoko shit. And they all went, sit down, you dickhead. We all said that. And I went...
The expected response.
Yeah. Anyway, you fast forward to 2005 and I'm working for Mirvac as a site manager by then. I'd been to London. I'd done all sorts of stuff. I'd finished my diploma. And this old guy that was in the room that day, Ray, is walking down the street. And he'd been working on the refinery building. So we were doing the housing element to that development, and he was doing the commercial. And he had been working on the refinery building for about 6 months. And the two of us had never crossed paths. We were literally within 50 to 60 metres of each other for 6 months. And hadn't. And on this particular day, it was his last day of work. He was retiring. And he comes walking down the street, and I'm walking up the street. He goes, "Hey, Joe, how are you?" And I hadn't seen him since, I finished laying bricks in 97, so I hadn't seen him since then. He says, "Bugger me, you did it."
You did it. He got out.
And I said, "Did what?" And he reminded me of what I'd done in the smoko room.
Yeah, right.
And I went, "Geez, I did that in 7 years, right? I didn't do it in 10, So interesting that when you set your mind to something and forget it, to be fair, I let go of the need to, but I put all the steps in place. I did the diploma, and that's what led me into my future roles. And I think the significance of those moments is that I want to articulate that whilst I had one side of me that was quite destructive, I had this other side that was driven, passionate, engaged, and whatnot. And I was in leadership roles all the way through my 20s. I started running jobs. To be fair, there were small jobs that I was running as an apprentice. So people had recognised in me along the way, whilst I did not see this in myself, that leadership quality. When I was finally given, roles in my early 20s, probably 22, 23 years of age, I would suggest that I was a forceful leader. So this really comes in and around leadership and in relationship, right? It comes down to control versus influence. And so as a 23-year-old, scared like a jackrabbit, basically, I got to control all of this. Otherwise, my boss is going to be up me for the rent, all of those sorts of things. And to be fair, I'm working in an environment there's not a lot of evolution in there. We're not sitting there trying to coach people. My first major job was a high-rise in the city.
Yeah.
I went in there with a guy, Ray, and he says to me, Bill was the guy that pulled me in there, and we'd done some work in the early stages of this job in the basement levels, and he says, "Hey mate, just come up." So I drive into town. It was in Mary Street, I think it was, and we go in there and we're in the basement. So I said, "Mate, what am I here for?" And he gives me a box of plans. He says, "It's yours," and walked out the door. That was my
welcome to A grade.
Welcome to A grade. And I went
on a high-rise building.
On a high-rise building.
Yeah.
I hadn't been introduced to anybody from Multiplex who were building it, other than the guys I already knew from the couple of times that I'd been there. I didn't know who was coming the next day, and it was the next day. So this is like 3:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So guys come in the next day. I don't know where I'm supposed to start. I didn't even know if there were blocks on site. And I went up to the Multiplex guys and I said, "Hey, where do you want us?" And they said, "Well, we need you on level 4," and off we went. Right? And I worked it out, and I worked my butt off, to get it sorted and whatnot. And that's one thing that I'd recognise. But when I got guys in, I controlled the living daylights.
Yeah.
I'd been given a target to hit. We had 5 days to finish a floor. And what we ended up having was 4 guys, 5 days to finish a floor. My target was to smash that target every time. And knowing business now, I know that target would already have inbuilt fat in it, right? So he would have been making good profit on the 5 days. I was smashing it in 3.5. So we did a 25-story tower. Instead of 5 days, I was doing it in 3.5.
Yeah,
so
wow.
he was getting a day and a half out of me every. So I then went very quickly to a guy for my boss then as a fixer. So he'd take me to other jobs and go, "Mate, what can you see? We're having dramas here. They're not making their numbers." I'd walk in 2 weeks later, bang, everybody's getting their numbers. And a lot of that was because I was very organised. One of the benefits, I think, and I was telling you this story today, was that I had a great capacity to think forward. And that was because I used to work with my dad a lot. And if I didn't know what he needed before he did, then that was a flogging that evening, right?
Yeah.
And, I won't go into the story in Italy, but, there was a reckoning on that with he and I when we had a conversation back in 2003 about it. Anyway, so I've got this great planning brain. I'm driven to do that because, to be fair, underneath it is anxiety going the whole time, that if I don't get this right, I'm not valuable, I'm not lovable, I'm a coward, right? Or a failure. I probably would have translated that at those in my 20s as a failure, and then go from there. Anyway, 2003, clean myself up, start the course. Hadn't been dating for quite some time because, to be fair, in my relationship side of things, I pretty much hated women at that point in my life. And not because I hated women, because I hated myself.
Of course.
I had no confidence in myself whatsoever. I hadn't really held down a relationship since my first love, which was finished at 19. And any women that I did attract really only served to rip apart what was already pretty much torn, right? So I remember in May of that year, I decided to go and date, and I remember the first date, I was a big spender. I took her out to McDonald's. I wasn't really interested. It was just, we'd met. I took her out for dinner.
I hope you got a meal or some description.
Oh, she got a deal. She got the
perfect.
Coke and the fries. And back then we didn't have meal deals.
Look out.
And we went to a movie or something
Big
like
spender.
that. Oh,
Did you get some popcorn or what?
I think she paid for the popcorn.
No. Perfect.
And then literally 2 weeks later, and I knew that relationship wasn't going to go anywhere, but 2 weeks later I met my wife of 24 years. And so interesting that when you get yourself onto a path and you start to get centered to who you want to be, that stuff just starts to turn up for you. And that's literally what happened. And that 24 years is probably the most stable, whilst I had my own personal battles in that 24 years, most stable part of my life, to be fair. And we raised 2 beautiful, gorgeous children in that time. We travelled.
Yeah.
We ran a business together, and then my stuff crept back in towards the end. And so, out of all of this, and certainly what I see as part of that, the demise of my relationship and also in my business, was that I was incredibly influential on one hand, but driven to control everything on the other. I was literally a control freak.
Yeah.
Which is exhausting.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what was your experience of life like, being so controlling?
Well, the one thing I'm not short of is energy. Until I was.
You're right.
And I had my reckoning with that about 3 or 4 years ago, when the one thing I've never had to look for is energy. And you only got to go on the drink with me, Simon, to know that. But energy is the thing, right? And then I lost it. And so I had energy to burn. So for me, the duality of this is that the thing that it was costing me was this energy, but I had heaps of it anyway, so who cares, right?
That's
Just
right,
keep burning it.
Yeah.
And
Invincible, right?
Well, mate.
Invincible.
Yeah. And I remember when I first started my business, within about 2 or 3 months of starting that business, I recognised that my heart, physically, I could feel my heart all day.
Yeah.
And it was